went was to see a workshop production of the new musical adaptation of The Prince of Egypt, which, have you seen that movie, actually?
I have not seen that movie.
Okay.
I've heard a lot about it because it's I guess it's, some people call it like the DreamWorks magnum opus.
Yeah, well, I shy away from that. I definitely think it's worth seeing.
Okay.
It's no Road to El Dorado, which I think is not a good movie. But
Road to El Dorado has like a really rabid fan base, I'm finding.
that movie is not that good. I have seen it, and I can confirm that movie lives and dies on the chemistry between Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline, who play the two lead characters, which is great. But other than that, it's kind of a not so hot movie. Prince of Egypt is good. It's not really.
Is it podcast material?
I don't think it's podcast material. The music in it is great. It's Steven Schwartz, who also co-wrote the songs for Hunchback, so you know he can really bring an A game.
Oh yeah.
The main reason I shy away from it is, like, I really don't like the way the characters are drawn. Like, the animation style is really not my personal kind of preference. It is good, though, and there's a lot of interesting things in it. It's as far as biblical adaptations go, it's one of the more interesting ones that I've seen.
Just like brief preview, just like this is just something that's in my head from watching Kino's Journey, is that like just how much not just like character animation, because when like we think of like good animation, we think of like basic things like, oh, the backgrounds are really detailed, it's really flowing, but we really don't talk too much about like just basic character construction.
Yeah.
Most of the time we kind of lean to a sort of like Japanese Disney brain trust of like big eye sort of reduced features everywhere else.
Yeah, and that's
especially like on TV, it's lots of like simplified stuff.
Right. And I'm not casting any aspersions on like the quality of the animation, because it is a beautifully animated movie.
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's absolutely fucking gorgeous.
Yeah, it's very, very rich, and they actually integrate CGI into their animation much better than Disney was doing at that point.
Yes. Have you seen Treasure Planet?
Yeah, I have, and hoo boy.
I think that movie's fascinating in a lot of ways, but its integration is not the best.
It's not. It is. Treasure Planet's integration is better than, say, Hercules, but which I love, by the way.
You can do a whole fucking week on like late '90s CGI.
Oh boy. Yeah, but we're not gonna do that.
For the sake of our audience.
For the sake of our sanity. Anyway. Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show, everybody.
We talk about animation, too.
We do! Huzzah. Spooktober has officially concluded. We are back to kind of our bread and butter here on the show, which is
random pairings!
Two random-ass movies that we have not seen, pairing them together, talking about them. It's gonna be a rollicking good time, I hope.
Oh boy, it is. But first comes, as it always does, the age-old question. Tyler.
Yes.
What have you been watching?
Oh, thank you, John. Let's see. What have I been watching here?
But we have to mix it up at some point. I can't like burden you with like having hostal duties the entire time.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Okay, I saw a few things this past week. Last Sunday, I watched a little movie called 500 Days of Summer. Have you heard of this movie?
To Google.
Okay. It's not the movie you would seek. It's not the kind of movie you would seek out.
Anything that's called 500 Days of Summer does not sound like a John feature film.
It's definitely not. I think this would incite depression and rage from you. I did enjoy this movie. I also found it a bit troubling. This is one of those movies where this is a classic go-to movie, I think, to present the manic pixie dream girl archetype.
Okay.
Which, now, there is a bit of an asterisk here, which I'll get to in a minute. This movie concerns Joseph Gordon-Levitt, one of my favorite actors, I think, or at least
I think he's. He's been in some garbage, but I think he's a pretty damn good performer.
Yeah, his choices of projects have been a little bit lacking, but I'm casting no aspersions on him as an actor. I think he's very good.
Some great actors sometimes have just shitty agents.
That is true. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt is this kind of 20-something casting about for true love, as one does, and he meets Zooey Deschanel as Summer, and they get into kind of a strange relationship. It's this movie very much takes its cues from Annie Hall.
Okay.
In that it
So you're interested in me. You said a lot of things that sort of strayed me away, but saying Annie Hall, you kind of brought me back.
Yeah, well, it's nowhere near as it's not as clever as Annie Hall, or few things are. But this movie does have its own kind of nice little fun touches and eccentricities and like clever little storytelling devices that it does, and it's all kind of done in an interesting non-linear way where they kind of jump around. Like, it's called 500 Days of Summer. They have like a title card that'll pop up every so often to show you like which day they're going to in the 500 days. It'll like flip like 300.
So it's kind of like the experience of like flipping through a book just in non-linear fashion.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a fun movie. I did enjoy it quite a bit. I thought it was quite charming. It's it takes place in LA, but they only shot in downtown and shoot it in a way that so makes it look like New York that I didn't know it wasn't New York until they said it about said it was LA about halfway through the movie.
Interesting.
So that's all good stuff. The problem is I am really not sure how much clarity this movie has about Zooey Deschanel's character. And now here's the thing. The movie does tip its hand a little bit because Joseph Gordon-Levitt is clearly the protagonist, and he definitely does not. He has a very clouded view of her and kind of views her more as not less as a person and more of just kind of a more abstract thing. Like, he does not see her clearly. And you could definitely argue that the movie is just kind of assuming his perspective. The problem is, it is not super clear how aware they are of that. There is stuff at the end that goes some way toward redeeming it, but I still think you can show the audience that and still make your female lead a character. And so that's
something. So like pretty much like what this movie is that like one of like our two main characters, our only big female character, is little more than just like a platform to develop Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yeah, and that's a problem.
Okay.
This is not a problem that is unique to this movie, by the way.
No. Oh, hardly. This trope's been around for, some might say, since the beginning of literature.
Yeah, and I would say that this movie on the spectrum is definitely on the better side of that. Still a bit of a problem, I think. And it is a fun movie. I still really don't think you would like it, but it is a fun.
I just love little indie land like love stories. That's just my bread and butter.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I do like it, and it was directed by Mark Webb, who, boy, he is not on a good run lately. But
what the fuck has he done since the Spider-Man movie?
He made this movie that came out this year, actually, called Gifted, which I didn't see. People seem to like it. That seemed like a totally like low-key kind of charming kind of movie.
Well, half the internet just kind of thinks he did the Spider-Man movies just because his name's Webb.
Well,
and I think he just has the scars from it and just like, I just want to do something small.
Yeah, which I completely understand. But this movie shows that he does have some chops as a filmmaker. I would really like to see him get back to something like this.
Okay.
So maybe he just needs to find the right material again.
Maybe so. So, 500 Days of Summer. I will probably never see it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you have brought it to my attention to discuss the Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's worth talking about. So that's that. I also saw 2017's A Ghost Story. Now, John, you know about do you know about this movie?
I don't. I honestly don't.
Oh, okay.
I think I've heard the title, but I don't think I ever looked into it.
Okay. Well, this movie is this movie got a lot of attention simply because it's the movie starring Casey Affleck as a dead man who comes back as a ghost, and the form he takes is a classic bedsheet Halloween costume ghost. Yeah. So this movie was directed by David Lowery, who recently directed the Pete's Dragon remake for Disney, which I thought was a totally fine movie. I think it is definitely it took the right approach to...
If you are going to, like, sodomize your back catalog, it is of the best quality of sodomizing.
It is represented... Listen, if Pete's Dragon were the only, like, remake of one of their older movies that Disney was making, I'd be perfectly fine with that. Yeah. I'd be perfectly fine with it. As is, it's a symbol of something that I despise. But anyway, that's not the point of this. So, A Ghost Story he made very quickly. He made it for like $100,000. Stars Casey Affleck as Ghost. Stars...
That's adorable. I love that.
Yeah, stars Rooney Mara as his wife. His soon-to-be widowed wife. Yeah. And I don't want to totally dismiss this movie because I think there are a few interesting things in it, but...
It sounds interesting.
Yeah, I hated it. This was one of the most excruciating viewing experiences I've ever had.
Oh boy!
Listen, let me say this. I am so glad that cinema has advanced to the point where we can have a 5-minute static shot of Rooney Mara eating pie, and then running to the bathroom and throwing up because she ate too much pie. That happens in this goddamn movie.
This movie's only an hour and 27 minutes.
Yeah! It's the longest hour and 27 minutes of my life, I swear to God.
Art.
Yeah, it's just... This movie is so slow, and so... so little happens in the movie, which is fine, but, like, it did not seem to me to be saying anything terribly profound, and I honestly, like, I think a movie that, like, invites you to read whatever you want into it, that is not something that I find profound at all. So, I just, and...
Well, here's the thing about it, like, I mean, I am not against, like, ambiguous, open things. My favorite things happen to be bad. But, like, you do need, like, a filmic perspective.
Well, there's a difference...
You need, like, a jumping off point for, like, conversation.
Yeah, there's a difference between ambiguity and, like,
nothing there.
Not having a theme, really. I mean, well, I don't want to say that. There is... My friend kind of explained to me his reading of the movie, and that seemed to me to be actually pretty valid, but I don't know. I just didn't find this movie particularly...
This is the Rotten Tomatoes consensus for A Ghost Story deftly manages its ambitious themes through an inventive, artful, and ultimately poignant exploration of love and loss.
Well, here's my thing. Ambitious themes? No. I didn't even... I forgot. I totally forgot. I just remembered what my basic explanation of this movie was. This movie is Beetlejuice. This movie is, like, way less fun, way less entertaining, like, stupidly esoteric for no reason Beetlejuice.
Oh, you know that, like, really ambitious and, like, artful film Beetlejuice.
I swear to God, like, I watched the movie, it ended, and I was like, that was basically Beetlejuice! That was, like, Terrence Malick's Beetlejuice!
You know, like, this is something I'm starting to notice, that, like, modern film has, like, developed a spectrum, whereas, like, we just get a bunch of shit that is either, like, edited to hell and just so quick you can't get anything from it, or just, like, ponderous, like, long take reactions to that, which really have no reason to be that.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's one of the most general statements I've ever made, but I think, especially coming off of Blade Runner 2049, I think I have the ability to say that.
No, I think you're onto something there, and that's something we could delve deeply into at another time. But
yeah.
Anyway, so that's a ghost story. I do not recommend it, but
I'll look at the funny poster and nothing more.
Yeah. The other thing is that that image is no less funny in the context of the movie when Casey Affleck first shows up in that.
Oh wait a minute, that's not a joke?
No, that's part of the movie. I thought I explained this. He's literally like.
But they don't make jokes about that. It's not a comedy.
No.
It's one of the most misjudged things I think I've ever seen.
And based on what I've read,
objectively funny thing.
Well, yeah, based on what I've read, I think the director claims to have recognized that that's an inherently funny image and meant to play on that somehow. I don't know what his intention was, but that does not come across. It just was ridiculous. When Casey Affleck first shows up in that outfit, I almost burst out laughing.
Look at the shot. Look at this fucking thing. How can you not burst out laughing at that?
Oh, man.
This is fascinating. Oh, goodness.
So that's that.
But what else has been on?
Okay, I have a couple other things to talk about. I saw a movie called Hopscotch. This movie came out in 1980. Stars Walter Matthau as kind of a disgruntled CIA agent who quits after being taken to task by his new boss, played by Ned Beatty. So then he decides to write his memoirs of his time at the agency and leads the CIA on a merry chase across various continents as they pursue him, trying to track him down and eliminate him because they're desperately trying to avoid his memoirs getting out there and seriously embarrassing the CIA. Very amusing in concept. Parts of it are pretty funny. This movie is kind of fine. No, I don't know. It kind of goes on a little too long and is not nearly as energetic as you would think a movie like that would be.
It sounds kind of like, okay, well, what was the movie we saw that had had the accidental secret agent and they went to a foreign country?
The In-Laws.
The In-Laws.
Yeah,
that's kind of what the premise sounds like.
Yeah, it's like that, but way less witty and fast paced than that movie was. It also lacks the wonderful comedic figure of Alan Arkin playing the straight or the kind of the buffoon of that movie. So that that movie's kind of whatever. Anyway, and then I saw a Whit Stillman movie from the 1990s called The Last Days of Disco. This was kind of a movie very much of the kind of 90s indie movie boom that people talk about a lot.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, it's very kind of a piece with Noah Baumbach's kind of earlier movies, but it is much. I don't want to say cleverer than Baumbach is, but it has a very different voice. It's very witty and very fast moving and it has a lot of energy to it that Baumbach's movies kind of don't have. That's not a knock against Baumbach's movies. They're very good in their own way, but this movie basically concerns a bunch of young people living in Manhattan at the very beginning of the 1980s as disco is on the way out, as the title would suggest. It is it is episodic to a certain extent, but it's episodic in the sense that it has a lot of running threads that it cuts between. It's
it seems like it's cutting between what would be separate episodes of a television show.
Yeah, it's very much an ensemble piece. Stars a lot of very good actors. A young Kate Beckinsale, a young Chloe Sevigny, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Savini, something like that. I always like her.
Okay.
Chris Eigenmann, who was in Noah Baumbach's Kicking and Screaming, which I liked a bit, shows up again here playing a pretty similar character. He's great. I like him a lot. It's a fun movie. It's got a lot going for it. I'm trying to decide whether you would like this movie or not. I think there's enough going on in it that you might enjoy it.
I guess I kind of love the idea of sort of a character-driven analysis of the last days of disco.
Yeah, and that stuff is all addressed, and like you're sensing the shift in culture, and they talk a lot about like, why are you people living like this? Like, can't your parents help you? Like, what are you doing? Like, they're living in this like railroad apartment. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe I will go check it out when the time fairy grants me free time.
Yeah. So there you go. And I also just rewatched When Harry Met Sally, which we don't need to get too deep into, but
Okay.
I think that movie is pretty much perfect. I enjoy it. Have you seen it?
I don't think I have.
Oh, that movie is fantastic.
Don't think I have. It's quoted a lot.
It is quoted a lot, and it's great. There's so much richness to it, and I would recommend it to anybody.
Okay.
So,
Ooh, it's only 96 minutes.
yeah, very good movie. Billy Crystal's great. Meg Ryan's great. Tenora Ephron, she's wonderful. Rob Reiner directs, of course, and yeah, great stuff.
It's part of like that string of classics that Rob
Yeah.
Reiner had.
Yeah.
Okay then. But so is that it?
That is what I have been watching. John,
Alrighty.
what about you? What have you?
I have a much less impressive list. Like the only thing I was able to watch, and this was for a class, and I'm going to do like a big project on this. I watched a bit of MASH, a television show.
Yes.
It's actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's got some good character driven gags. It's really visually driven for a television show. There's quite a few visual gags and that sort of thing, and I wasn't expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of charm, but boy, is it sexist! Boy!
Oh.
Just like in the first episode, one of these subplots is Hawkeye Pierce sexually harassing a married woman, and there's one point where this is the main thrust of the episode, where there's a Korean boy on the camp, and at one point he's been accepted to an American college and have to raise up tuition. So what they do is that they raffle off one of the nurses.
Oh boy.
And that's not addressed. And because Hawkeye, they're doctors.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, there's the head nurse there, who they degrade and call hot lips all the time, and that's really bad.
Yeah.
I'm pretty torn on it. For I honestly think it's a pretty entertaining piece of television.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, can I not escape?
Oh man.
Some of the it's not even subtext at a certain point. It's pretty overt.
Yeah. Oh, 1970s television.
Well, though apparently from what I've heard, that show is pretty clear-eyed about racism during the Korean War. I was talking about it with the instructor of the class I'm doing this for, and he said there's an episode where and I haven't been able to do this yet because time just fucked me. Yeah, there's an episode where there's this really racist person who has what would have been the Korean War equivalent of a comfort woman, and apparently it's really clear-eyed about that. But there's also kind of this narrative of bad, racist, good people,
mm-hmm.
and how there's a clear divide in that.
Yeah,
which is all stuff I will have to write about for this class. But I've already written fairly exhaustively on how the show treats women already.
Okay. Well, this is kind of one of the defining shows of all of television, really. This show was a huge hit.
It's one of the cultural touchstones.
It ran for 12 years, and it
outran its Vietnam allegory.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah, I haven't seen any of the show. Did you? We watched the movie for our Altman episode last year.
I never got to it.
Okay.
I remember you didn't like it, but what really was the movie like? Again, does anything I'm saying sound like a descriptor of it?
Yeah, well, the movie is pretty much the same kind of setup. It's these army doctors who are stationed in Korea, and just kind of tried.
Korea may be fake Vietnam.
Yeah, basically fake. I honestly had to think for a minute, was it Korea or was it Vietnam? I'm pretty sure it was Korea in the movie. Yeah, and they just kind of resort to all these crazy antics to deal with kind of the horrors of war. It's interesting. It's an interesting movie. I did not find it very funny at all, so it's good to hear that the show is actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it made me laugh.
Okay.
Sometimes, and sometimes I just went, Good God, 1970s.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem in the movie too. There's a big sequence where they expose that nurse when she's in the shower, and that's kind of a whole thing.
Boy.
It's weird.
Right.
I did not love that movie by any
To
stretch.
quote Alex, it's not great.
It's not great.
But like I am not dreading going back to the show. I was entertained, and like it's more visually driven than like it probably a lot of its contemporaries, especially like the multicam sitcoms going on then.
Yeah.
So MASH, I guess I'd recommend it, but know what you're getting into.
All right, good to know. Good to know.
That is pretty much it of my extent. Everything else I've seen, I have restrained myself to. When that runs its pace.
Yes.
So.
John has decided that at the end of the season, he will have a big hour-long recap and dissection of the new Kino's Journey season.
It's going to be kind of a redux of what we did when we actually reviewed the 2003 show, which will be something. And I'm gonna have to sit down like Alex or Matthew, sort of Clockwork Orange style.
Oh, good. Everyone will finally meet the long-fabled Matthew and Alex of...
Well, Alex has been in the background. I don't think Matthew ever has.
Matthew never has, but yes. Alex was the mysterious voice who would pop in the background on some of these episodes.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, like, I'm going to choose them because, like, both you and Reed are just kind of view anime like this strange, like, monster in the corner of filmic circles.
Yeah.
Whereas, like Alex and Matthew are more, they're not really weebs per se, but they're apologists, is what I'll call it.
All right.
So, but that's coming then. Are we ready to talk about two movies that have nothing to do with each other?
Let's do it. I am excited to do so.
I am too.
Alrighty.
So where do you want to start?
Alright, so this week we watched M. Night Shyamalan's second movie, Unbreakable, starring Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, and we also watched, actually this was also his second movie, Yorgos Lanthimos' Dogtooth. Greek movie. Where do I want to start?
I have more to say about Unbreakable, but I think Dogtooth is something that we also have a lot to say about.
I don't have a ton to say about Dogtooth.
I have a theory about it, but that's about it.
Okay, let's start with Dogtooth.
Okay, so Dogtooth is a Greek film about a sort of really strict patriarchal family that keeps its children within its, not only just like keeping the children in the home, but like giving them a stilted perspective of the world and constantly telling them lies about the outside world.
These children are, in a very real way, imprisoned in this home.
Yes,
and
there's literally a giant fence, and like there's a giant like gate that comes up and down when like the father has to go to work.
Yeah, they are totally isolated from the outside world, and let me be clear about this. They are no longer children. They are full-grown adults who are still kept in this fake world that their parents have constructed for them. Although I think it is made pretty clear that the father is kind of the architect of all this, although the mother definitely is complicit as well.
There's something very patriarchal about it.
Yeah, and basically, they have never been outside, they have no idea what a lot of things are. Like, one little touch I really appreciated was, like, they are told words mean different things. Like, there's a dinner scene where, like, one of the daughters says, pass the telephone, please, and the mom passes her the salt shaker.
And there's, like, other moments where, like, what's a zombie?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a yellow flower. Then later on, Mom, I found some zombies!
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, so also, there is a sex surrogate who is brought in to satisfy the son of the family.
But not the daughters.
Not the daughters.
Well,
we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. But yes, she is brought in to satisfy the son and is brought to and from the house by the father, blindfolded, and this is all made clear like pretty much right off the bat. The movie opens with one of the least sexy sex scenes that's ever been put on film.
Yeah, Sex in this movie is just like this really awkward and just like ponderous thing that like people are only obligated to do, it seems.
Yeah.
And like, and there's also like people like prostitution is just a thing. Like, there's always some like economic value in like sex.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Like, it's always like, give me these VCH tapes. Like, oh, I'm getting paid to bonk your son, and like that sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, this movie was made by Yorgos Lanthimos, who also directed the movie The Lobster, which came out last year.
Which is a movie I didn't love.
I didn't love it. I didn't love it either. I also did admire it. It had a kind of unique, skewed vision that ultimately I think was like less suited to that material than it is to the material in Dogtooth, I think.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that, like, both of these films are about, like, these super restrictive, hermetically sealed worlds.
Yeah.
And The Lobster, there is half of the movie is, like, is broken out of that. Whereas in Dogtooth, that's the end.
Right.
Even, like, there's still, most of them are still in the sealed environment.
Yeah. And I think, like, Yorgos Lanthimos has a very, like, darkly comic, very, like, acidic, skewed. I'm trying to think of the right word here. Like,
like all the shots are very still. The sound design's very minimal.
Yeah.
But sometimes you will just get some utterly insane things happening on camera.
Oh my god. Yeah.
And then it's all like, you're right. It's like, it's deeply, deeply dark, especially Dogtooth. But also, like, there's also kind of like silly, farcical comedy sort of underlying it.
Yeah, well, I don't think anything underlines that better than the scene in this movie where the brother finds a stray cat in the backyard.
Yeah.
And reacts
with garden.
Well, he has clearly never seen a cat before, so he like stares at it like wide-eyed in a way that is hilarious, and then like backs away, reappears in the frame with these like giant garden shears and like runs toward it in a way that is really funny, and then immediately becomes horrifying when he stabs the cat to death with the garden shears.
That is the movie in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I think we're beating at around the bush here, so I was like, Tyler, what actually did you think of Dogtooth?
I liked it, but this movie is very upsetting.
I think it's about communism.
Okay, all right, you've got a theory. I want to hear this theory. I want to hear this theory because I couldn't possibly tell you what this movie is about.
Okay. All right, especially like the sex stuff kind of made me go back to this because, like, well, granted, a lot of what I know about communism is like via Masha Gessen and Western media. I obviously have never lived in a communist country, nor have I done much extensive research, so I am not an expert. But I think there was Masha Gessen once said, like, somebody asked her about like how like sex contradicts with like with the Orthodox Church and how Russians view sex, and she said something akin to something like, "Well, the '60s like sexual revolution happened, but Russia had the Soviet Union, so all of that societal change never happened in Russia. So sex is just something that is not in the Russian lexicon. It is just not talked about. It is just a non-object, even beyond like the heavy use of the Orthodox Church. Like the totalitarian state just simply didn't allow for that societal change to happen. And what you see in the kids is that, like, and I call them kids, but like they are full adults.
Yeah.
Is that like there is some almost like obligatory like sex is something that is all over this movie, but never discussed.
Yeah.
No one talks about it. We say the word pussy once in like a comic scene where like didn't what do they say like pussy means?
They said it's a big light.
It's a big light, yes.
Like, it's getting dark outside. Turn on the pussy.
Yeah, turn on the exactly. And again, like, and there's also that. There's sort of like communist doublespeak is in here, where it's like there's just like a deliberate like thing means the opposite of its actual meaning. That was like a common thing you see in these totalitarian spheres. And I don't think, and there's like the really obvious stuff like how like no one was allowed to leave the Soviet Union, travel was banned, and of course the kids are stuck there. but I also find it weird that like Lanthimos has no real experience of communism. Greece has never been communist, so like
Right.
I am curious where this all came from.
Yeah.
Other than like just maybe like when you present like a super totalitarian patriarchal society, one thinks of communism.
That's interesting. That's something I hadn't really given much thought to. I like finished this movie this morning, so it's still kind of fresh for me.
Well, the moment I finished it, well, I was just kind of like, well, that's a movie.
Yeah.
Well, that's a movie.
I mean, well, what did you think of it kind of as a movie?
As a movie, I mean, like, I'm not gonna. It's funny at times,
Yeah.
but like, I think like it is just so like utterly, sometimes shocking, sometimes disturbing. This movie just has a pitch black heart.
Yeah.
Everyone's terrible. Everyone's stunted. Like there are just some like brutal imagery from like the cat getting killed to like there is the imagery of like the father beating his daughter with a VCR tape taped to his hand. There was like they beat the sex surrogate with the VCR player.
Yeah.
And that stuff just goes on in unflinching, uncutting detail.
That this movie made me like flinch away from my television more than any of the horror movies we watched.
I'm just like, oh fuck, man. Like, I think like there was the moment where like she tries like to break her tooth, and I'm like,
yeah, yo, when that happened, I like actually like jumped like 3 feet backwards. Like I do.
It's just so sudden because like, especially like Lanthimos' camera and stage direction are just so still.
Yeah.
When that shit happens, it is just so jarring and just so sudden. Sometimes that's hilarious, like with the garden shears coming out.
Right.
But like other times, it's literally like blood's now splattered across the mirror. Holy fuck! Holy fuck! Holy fuck!
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm just not sure how to react to that.
Yeah, it is a confounding movie in a lot of ways. Like you watch it and you're like, I'm not sure if I'm like supposed to be laughing or if I'm supposed to be horrified or like I'm not really sure what to feel in this moment.
Was incest involved?
Why? Jesus. Yeah. No, there is a.
You can't go on this long without mentioning the incest.
Yeah, well, there's a portion where after like the father discovers that the sex surrogate gave a couple of rented movies on VHS to one of the daughters, he goes and beats her with a VCR and then decides, well, we have to satisfy his sexual impulses in some way. Guess we just have to use one of the girls.
And I genuinely don't know what to make of that, or like know like what the like general social commentary of that is, other than like.
Is there social commentary in this movie?
I don't know.
It's hard to tell.
Like I said, I think it's about communism.
Yeah, I don't know. And I did kind of like this movie, and I did appreciate a lot of it.
Bored.
Yeah, I was never bored. And I do think that, like, Lanthimos'
and I widely appreciate it, too.
Yeah, Lanthimos' sensibilities, I think, are very well harnessed for this material, and the way he kind of constructs this bizarre, stilted world is, I think, very well done. There's a lot of really interesting shots where like he'll frame it so that everybody's head is cut off, and
there's like I guess sort of Lanthimos makes me think like what if the point of Wes Anderson's movies was that everyone was terrible and nobody had heart?
Yeah.
That's kind of like, they're like really meticulous, really easy to identify style. But like part of like the point of that is like this super dark, super nihilistic world.
Yeah.
It's not, there are no arcs.
There are no arcs. There is no emotionality in this movie at all.
Everyone seems to be like even when shocking things happen, people it's almost like when you go back to Russia. It's almost like when you watch like the comet videos from like Russia a few years ago, and people just look at it and just go, and I just had no reaction to it other than like, oh, that's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird, and again, like seeing this made me realize like how strange of a choice of a project The Lobster was for him, because that movie is like in essence like a love story, and his sensibilities are not well suited to a love story, like, at all.
That movie also ends on self-mutilation.
That movie also ends with, well, at least the suggestion of self-mutilation and cut a shot of, like, waiting anticipation that simply cuts to black.
Yeah, so this guy's fascinating. I think we're both kind of on. We're not quite sure if we like him.
we are not quite sure if we like him, but we certainly do appreciate what he's doing. And
I am glad someone like this is making movies.
Yeah.
I am glad like we have like every once in a while a movie that is about the black nihilistic heart of humanity.
Yeah, and I haven't seen his new movie yet, The Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Yeah, I just found out like this, like he had a movie that came out this year.
Yeah, but I'm very interested to see what that is going to be.
As am I.
So,
Dogtooth.
Yeah.
An acquired taste?
Decidedly an acquired taste. This movie is not for everyone.
Nope.
There are very, very few people I would.
Yeah, like.
Well, okay, let me say this.
I'm kind of glad Reed isn't here this week. Because, like, kind of going.
Yeah, I think this movie might have fucked it up a little bit.
The sensibilities of our homely Dr. Reed.
Yeah, I would not like unqualifiedly recommend this movie to anyone.
I guess I put it this way: like, if you hear what we're saying and still think, yeah, I'd love to watch that, then you will really like it.
Yeah.
If you know, because like we had nothing beforehand other than like we watched The Lobster and The Vidians exists.
Yes, true. I mean, I was prepared to I was prepared for this movie to be kind of fucked up, but no matter how
I was prepared for fucked up, but I wasn't prepared for like totalitarian patriarchal society where nobody has an arc. I think that is one of the most disturbing things to have in media.
Yeah.
Is like you start off with everyone horrible and the movie is about a lack of an arc.
Yeah. So there you go. So, that's Dogtooth.
If any of this sounds interesting, maybe you'd like it.
Maybe you would.
Be smart for life. Maybe you think about communism like I did. Who knows?
The communism thing is interesting, certainly. That's more of a working theory than I had coming out of this movie.
Yeah, because, well, granted, like, I can't think of anything but, like, socio-political themes and nation and state and that sort of thing. So I can whenever I see totalitarianism, this is what I imagine.
There you go.
I have a stilted set of optics.
All right. But let's move on to M. Night Shyamalan's superhero film of sorts.
Yeah, one of the... But it never presents itself. Like, I think, like, that's one of the kind of the big things about this movie is that, like, it is the superhero film that utterly just strips itself of anything one might consider superheroic.
Yes.
Or, like, indicative of the visuals one might see from these films.
Yes. So this is Unbreakable. So the film concerns Bruce Willis as David Dunn, who, after surviving a absurd scale train crash that kills everyone aboard.
Everyone is dead
but him, and he walks away without a scratch. So he gradually realizes that he has superhuman abilities, and he also attracts the attention of Samuel L. Jackson as Elijah Pierce, a man who is basically the exact opposite of him, in that he has a bone condition that renders his bones extremely fragile. And
like he can't go out to play with children, and like but he's also like obsessed with comic books.
Yeah.
And about like the mythology in them, the artwork of them, and like he thinks there's something about him in there.
Yeah.
And like when he hears about David Dunn, he like becomes fixated with him and goes like, "Oh, you are the superhero. This is what I've been waiting for." And he constantly says like, "I've seen like disasters happen over and over again, and I've now seen like somebody survive from there. You must be like my opposite." The sort of like just sort of fascinated with the mythology, like black and white mythology of comics.
Yeah. Now, one thing I thought that was interesting about this movie was that, like you say, like this is a totally like stripped down approach to the superhero narrative. Like this is just totally the real world. Where one guy just happens to have superpowers.
Yeah, like He's a security guard. It's he just lives in Philadelphia. It's not like some like big
Yeah.
like sort of. It's not really it's never a stilted reality. It's
No.
like we see like these are just Philadelphia people who do Philadelphian
Yep.
things and
He
have marital strife
Yep.
and so forth.
He's having problems with his marriage. He's struggling
Yep.
to connect with his kid. He's just living, day to
Mhm.
day, just regular Joe. And he also cannot be harmed.
Yep. Like Elijah Pierce is just kind of like a broke. I mean, I say this in mental sense. Like just kind of a sad, broken, defeated person
Yeah.
who just happens to have a cartoonish condition where his bones break like
Yeah.
plastic.
Yeah. There's a lot in this movie that I did really appreciate.
Mhm.
Although, well, okay. But the odd thing with this movie though is that like comic books are like a big thing, and like from
Like
what
comic books are in the universe, and they are like this huge, like ponderous thing
Yeah,
that it constantly reflects upon.
but also like from what I read, like Shyamalan like structured this movie to like reflect the structure of a comic book, and also like I read that like he like the way that he's constantly like framing characters like in between things and like in doorways and stuff was meant to kind of like suggest like comic book panels,
Interesting.
which is something that maybe doesn't come across as clearly as he meant it to.
No, well, here's the thing about it, is that like the perspective that one gains from comics in this movie is like this really kind of far off, sort of like intellectual, sort of like silly little picture books with really simplistic black and white narratives.
Yeah.
And that's not to say comics have never been that, but comics is also like this wildly diverse medium that also has things like Watchmen and Sandman and
Right.
like anything like by Neil Gaiman or whatever.
Yeah. So that's all a bit odd.
Yeah.
Like one also, and like I say, there's a lot that I really liked in this movie. I really do appreciate how this only comes off better now than I assume it did when this movie first came out. Is like how completely it like deconstructs the superhero idea. Like this is just a guy who feels like he should be helping people, has the means to do so, and decides, well, I guess I have to do this, and does so.
But it's also just kind of clear. It's not like the sort of like friendly crime that you see in like Ozzy.
Right.
He's not saving cats. He is rescuing a family from a deranged murderer.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone has been tied up, and it's like shot just like really disturbingly.
That scene where he like does his big like superhero rescue act that's a great sequence, and
that is unbelievable.
And a fantastic just illustration of like what a superhero would actually be in the real world, I think.
Like it's kind of awkward. It's kind of like there's a sense like he doesn't really know what to do. He doesn't really know how to handle the situation. Like, does he handle it with brute force? Like, there's like you kind of see like a lot of things going in his mind.
Yeah, and one other thing I really loved about this movie is like the look of it is so incredible. This is one of the most unique looking movies I think I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, like just like the opening, like shot where it's like kind of like where he's constantly like he's both like obtused and like sort of framed by seats, but it's also like from the perspective of like a little girl watching him.
Yeah,
and like there's like the wonderful image of just him just like hitting his head like leaned against it and framed by the seats.
Yeah.
Oh, and like this really really hidden wonder, I think.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great like stealth long takes in this movie where like it just kind of moves from one thing to the other like really like smoothly and just kind of flows from one thing to the next. That's all great stuff.
And a lot of really creative like compositions and starting points for
I love that shot when he's like in the house, like walking over to where the victims are tied up, and like it's shot like through the curtains and they ripple in a certain way to like reveal him and then reveal the victims and then reveal him again. I guarantee that was a pain in the ass for a couple of grips on set.
Or even things like there's like a shot in this movie where it's like it looks a lot like something from The Sixth Sense, but it's a really great shot as far as like we see like Bruce Willis walk up the stairs, look through a doorway, like at where his wife presumably is, and it's almost like film noir filmmaking, where he's
Mhm.
just so like caged in by like all like the architecture around him,
Yeah.
and like they could have done like just like a basic close up of him just looking at it, but no, they did like this really probably really elaborately choreographed and like planned sort of placement of him.
Yeah. I love all that. I also just love the way, like, a lot of the kind of little thematic things in this movie, like how Bruce Willis's wife, played by Robin Wright, is like a physical therapy like
Yeah, yeah,
person, and like her job is like healing people, and her husband can never be hurt. Like
yeah,
that's something I love.
yeah.
I love the whole thing with Samuel L. Jackson and his obsession with comic books. I think
Oh
that
yeah,
works really
I
well.
think I also this is one of the most interesting Samuel L. Jackson performances.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
He still has all the charisma, but there was something I don't think I've seen really Samuel L. Jackson do a truly defeated character.
Yeah.
There's something like people always kind of try to bank off like charisma and like the Tarantino like Samuel L. Jackson is just like larger than life
Yeah.
in tone, but here he's just like he looks so sad.
He is a
and
totally
it's really effective.
broken man, and yeah, it's really interesting to see him utilized in that way.
Yeah.
Now, that's all good stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in this movie that points to what Shyamalan would become in the future.
Yeah, like even like as we're talking about like some of the unbelievable shots in this movie, I think it's a really gorgeous movie.
Yeah, I definitely
Like
agree.
you do see the seeds of like I see where he could all go wrong.
Well,
I see where a happening could come from this style.
well, like you talked about how like in The Happening, like no one in that movie behaves like a real person would. In this movie, it's not quite at that level, but there are definitely like a lot of like it mainly comes down to the dialogue. Like
Yeah.
the things people say in this movie are not things that real people would say.
Nope.
Like
No,
I think
yeah,
Samuel
it is,
Jackson.
Like a real, like stilted.
It's so stilted. It's so strange. Like I think Samuel L. Jackson says at one point, like, "Is the child correct?" Like, I'm having trouble like remembering specific examples, but there's a lot of stuff like that, which is
Or it's like there's like the scene where like they ask like, "Have you slept with someone?"
that scene. Like Robin Wright like comes up to Bruce Willis and like says like, "Listen, I just want to ask. It's not going to affect me." Like what she says is, "It won't affect me." Like I am completely separated from all emotions. It will not affect me.
And like and Bruce Willis is just a blunt object in this moment. He has
Now-
no expression. He has nothing
now-
but just like a no.
Let me say, Robin Wright saves that scene by like
Yes.
kind of bursting into tears like after he says no.
That does turn into a great scene, but it's kind of just like, who the fuck says that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's all a bit strange. And then that ending is
Yeah.
not so hot.
Yeah, I'm still sort of like thinking what I think of it as
Well,
far as
okay, the actual twist, I do actually kind of like how like Samuel L. Jackson kind of orchestrated all these like disasters.
He's just like so obsessed with the comic form that like he is trying to validate his own worldview by destroying lots of public transportation.
Well, yeah. Well, not just public transportation, by like crashing an airplane and burning down a hotel.
Yeah.
Listen, I do appreciate that twist. It says something about like the structure of this movie and kind of how people eventually became very fatigued with the Shyamalan twist.
Yeah,
And that like
I think that's one thing we're coming at with this movie is that like you can see the seeds of what would eventually just sort of like throw off the rails and just become almost a parody
like
itself.
It by no means ruins the movie, but it would have been a much more effective like plot thing if it had come like at the end of the second act.
Yeah, it's just a really weird point to end the movie. It feels like we're sort of like missing something.
Well, yeah, exactly. And like, well, we're getting a sequel to this movie very soon, apparently.
That's real.
Oh, you didn't know about this? Oh, yeah. The movies, that movie he made last year, Split, or was that earlier this year? I think that was earlier this year, actually. Split.
I think it was.
Split apparently takes place in the same universe, and we're going to get a movie either next year or in 2019. Star with Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson reprising their roles, and also James McAvoy's going to be there.
What the fuck have movies become?
So yeah, that's all a bit strange. But well, okay. The weird thing about it is like, you have like the whole arc of the movie is like Bruce Willis's development into a heroic figure, and that all
that's all there, and like it's almost like a sense of like there was the discovery of the superhero. It's a reveal that like he is like who he is,
and that all works really really well.
Mm-hmm. Like, and then I think it's like a great scene where they're like just like they just keep putting weight on the bench press. He just keeps lifting more and more. And sort of like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
That's I do really appreciate that. And also that scene where he like kind of slides the paper across to his son like the day after his whole thing, and his son just kind of looks at it and is like, I do really appreciate that. Then you have this scene that feels just totally like starting an extra act, but there isn't an extra act.
Yeah, because it feels he comes to like the art gallery. There's a sense of like resolution. This is kind of like him saying like you were right. I am this figure. Like what do I do next? And sort of like there's sort of like that reconciliation. And if anything, that's an arc for Samuel L. Jackson, who finally has his worldview, his ideas validated for him.
Yeah.
But no, we gotta blow up some planes.
But no, we have to totally invert what you thought Samuel L. Jackson was, and it turns out he orchestrated this whole thing to find this person who he was so convinced existed, who was the opposite of him. Now, listen, I like that in theory. Like, it's a really good idea, but man, it does not fit with the structure of the movie.
And like, it also gets like, we end on white text like it's a fucking true story.
Yeah! Like, and then you end with these, like, on-screen captions that are like, David Dunn reported Elijah Price's criminal actions to the police. Elijah Price is now in an asylum for the criminally insane. It's like...
And I guarantee they didn't have that in the first cut. They just kind of said, like, well, that's kind of, like, random. What happened to Elijah? And like, all right, fuck, we'll type some fucking text for you people.
And that's the one thing of this that, like, does feel very of a piece with contemporary superhero movies, is that feels like a blatant sequel tease.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
So, that's all strange. But that does not come anywhere close to diminishing the many pleasures of this movie, I
still
think.
think this is one of the most interesting superhero movies.
I agree.
This is one of the most, like, in-depth, like, deconstructions of the hero. Especially, like, we talk about, like, how, like, the Batman films try all they can, but they just can't get past the central conceit of it.
Yeah.
Of, like, the superhero is an inherently good thing, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it can't help but glorify itself.
Yeah. And
like this by just like stripping itself down, just really effective.
Like he doesn't even have a costume; he just wears his like security poncho,
which is adorable.
I love that, and like his weakness is water, which is interesting, and also apparently that's the only weakness Shyamalan could think of based on what I've heard about Signs. But anyway, spoiler alert for Signs.
That's not in The Happening.
Yeah,
it's the wind there.
But I would love to see like more stuff like this in terms of dealing with superheroes and superhero archetypes.
Will we ever be able to? Because like the superhero genre is just so tied up in these like expansive, massive corporate machines.
Yeah.
And at this point in 2000. The franchise really wasn't that much of a thing. Superhero films were just like any other like action franchises.
Yeah.
You would have a few sequels, and then you end on like 5 or 6 once it's become a parody of itself, or 4 in the case of like Batman films.
Right. I just think what we need is like more filmmakers, either people like James Mangold and James Gunn who are able to subvert the tropes and work within the system to produce something really interesting, or we just need more people like doing original superhero characters. Like this is.
I think that is. I think like I think it's I'd really like to look at Super at some point. One of James Gunn film.
Yeah.
Or like well, you said Kick-Ass is awful, but like the idea of like the original superhero is like an interesting idea that other people have tried to do.
Yeah, and that's
oddly it all came out like mostly before the giant Marvel machine. But...
right. Well, oddly, that's one of the reasons I really didn't like Kick-Ass is because it totally squandered an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So that's all. Whatever. Unbreakable, I would recommend. I think it's a very interesting movie with some.
I really like it.
Yeah, with some flaws, but it's very, very interesting, and I think definitely worth your time.
Yeah, as far as I can't like there are some things about like if you are looking for Shyamalanisms, they're there.
They are there.
They're there, but like there was also just kind of like a care and a complexity to it that is kind of surprising, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It is some of the best stuff Shyamalan's done at times.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I really need to rewatch The Sixth Sense. It's been a while since I've seen that.
I do too. The thing with the twist in that is like you have totally completed like the emotional journey of the movie, except for this one subplot, and then the twist just perfectly resolves that subplot. And it's a beautiful thing.
That's the thing about it works with like it's an actual fucking twist insofar as like it actually builds upon what you've come to before.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it's just kind of like, and that's the thing about like it's sort of that's always something that's read on the Shyamalan that like he like builds upon twists is almost like a crutch for actual like instead of actually doing interesting filmmaking.
Right. And to anyone out there, like my roommates, who has stayed away from The Sixth Sense because you already know the twist, even if you know the twist going in, which I did.
Yeah. Most of us do.
Most of us do.
That is one of the most spoiled twists I think in cinema history.
But even if you know the twist, like it still totally works, and you can still totally appreciate the beautiful construction of that beautiful movie.
Still a good fucking movie.
Yeah. So that's all good stuff. All right. So that's that. And what are we gonna do next time?
What are we gonna do next time? You know, like I just like listened to some of like our old episode where you talked about sort of sympathetic villain and how that might have caused like terrible cultural repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible? Like, what would be some films that could expand upon that idea?
Oh, that's interesting. What?
Because that's something that's like I don't want this to just go away.
Okay. Well, see, the most prominent examples I could think of that would not be good movies.
That's a problem, yeah. Damn it, we already did Into Darkness. That's not quite. I think like my go-to would be like the new Maleficent movie.
Oh God, I do not.
Where that's
kind of
like part of the central premise.
I don't want to watch that movie.
That's the problem. Like all of these things we're talking about, like we don't actually want to go through the effort of seeing them.
Yeah.
That's a problem with this.
I don't know. I mean, if we really wanted to explore that, we could just watch Lindsay Ellis's video on Disney villains.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So that was a thought.
That's an interesting. It's an interesting thought. I just don't. It might be a worthwhile exercise, but like I don't want to have to put myself through those movies.
My interpretation of that was maybe like going into like would be things like looking at like movies that take things from like the Nazis' perspective or shit like that. Whereas like but actually that's not even really that actually that's not even really that trope because like we go into that thinking they're monsters. So
yeah,
okay, this is a quandary. But like, did you have any actual incoming ideas as to what we could do next week?
I don't have any real preference. I mean, if you want to keep doing some random movie episodes, I'd be okay with that. If you wanted to pick a director, I'd be okay with that.
I kind of want to keep the random movie thing going because like I think I think we just have a bunch of things we just need to finally knock off our list.
That is true. Well, I mean, this episode would have a theme, but this would fit with just knocking things off our list. There's a couple of westerns I've been meaning to get around to for a while now.
Okay. What were some in particular you were thinking
of? Well, I really want to I've seen this movie, but I know you haven't, and I really want to rewatch it. John Ford's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Okay.
And I thought we could maybe pair that with Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch.
I can do that. I think the only Sam Peckinpah movie I've ever seen was like the batshit crazy World War II movie he did. called Cross of Iron.
I have not even seen that.
And I really love Cross of Iron. That has that has one of my favorite sort of sadistic endings.
Oh, interesting. Okay, The Wild Bunch is much longer than I thought it was.
Oh shit, you're right. Oh shit. Oh, it's more Western. Though actually, you know, one thing we could do is that like there is what one of the popular things last year was Noirvember.
Oh, that's true. Oh,
We could pair we could do a genre film episode where we pair like a classic film noir
with a classic Western?
classic Western.
Oh, you know, I might be really down for that, actually.
Actually, yeah, that's something.
Have
To
you
the internet again.
Have you ever seen Out of the Past?
No, I haven't. I've always wanted to, but I've just never gotten to it.
We should watch that.
I wholeheartedly agree.
All right, let's do it. All right. Interesting fact. This movie is directed by the same person who directed the original Cat People.
Interesting.
For those who don't know, the theme song of the remake, sung by David Bowie, was one of the touchstones of the early days of this podcast.
Yes, it was.
So, all right. Next week, Out of the Past and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
We are putting out fire with gasoline.
Once again.
Once again. I'm excited.
I'm very excited. This should be fun. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Don't you want to stay and talk about a Yorgos Lanthimos film?
Which one?
Dogtooth.
I didn't see it. Is it good?
Well, he can talk about his opinion of a ghost story.
Oh, he didn't watch it.
I didn't watch that either. Apparently,
shit.
Apparently, it's not good.
I hated it. Oh,
so I'm hearing.
I was literally just explaining that.
Let's see. I'm sorry. Google Blazing Saddles is not a classic Western.
Well, that's a great movie, but
oh, it's a great movie. I'm not denying that.
Let's see.